Okay, so June 24th, Friday night, we have a full weekly candle, and we're going to do a review of the broader equity markets, US, SPX, QQQ, and IWM. And I guess we'll also look at the dollar if we have time. And so we'll start on the daily chart. This is SPX we'll start with. So we made a lower low on June 17th. I think that was last Friday. So that was day 25 of of the daily cycle. And since then we've rallied. We had a big update today on, Friday, day 29 theoretically. And this is where daily the sort of specifics of daily cycles matter less and price action is the key. So notice, I'll zoom in here. This was your last daily cycle low, day 54, a really long daily cycle. Then we made a lower low on, what is that, day 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So we made a lower low, but then we continued to rally. We made a higher high above here. So it's complex trading, right? But because we made this lower low, you expect, wait, this is maybe a lower high of this high, and we're going to make a lower low below this lower low that we made from this one, right? Lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high. That's how a downtrend works. So we made that higher high on day 14, and then we just collapsed lower, right? So we swept these lows, and we're now actually above these lows, actually, which is very key. And it's really so in some ways it doesn't matter if it's day 29 of a daily cycle, or let's say in this case day 4 of a new daily cycle. That's the way to think about it, right? So count from this low. So this is 4 days possible. So it's either day 4 of a new daily cycle or day 29 of an existing cycle. Either way, it's a bearish cycle because we're making lower lows until or if we can break above 4186. So this like point right here, which it looks like we're maybe going to actually test. Let's look at the weekly chart really quickly. So we have a weekly swing low in place. That's really important to note, right? So week 16 becomes a swing low. So that was last week. This week is week 17. I mean, notice we got above, and I posted this on Twitter. Once we got above this area here, like that 38.45, that was our weekly swing low, and we closed well above that. Very strong close. Now, here's the thing to note, though. Do you notice here, right? This was a nice strong close too, right? Very strong, very nice. I'll just move this line up here so you can see, right? We got our weekly swing. We had our weekly swing low in real time. This was our weekly swing low. And the next week, we actually made a marginal high above this high. And then we just like consolidated up there for the whole week. That was the 7 red candles in a row. It looked like we were, especially on the futures, it looked like a bull flag. It was going to break up, but of course it did not break up. It broke down, right? That's what happened the following week. And then you had big downside follow through the week after, which was last week again, week 16. So either way, my sense is the odds are we're going to make a lower low below this low here at, what is that, 36. I'm watching the futures more closely. I think the futures are going to flush below 3,500, maybe even get to 32. I think you're probably in a similar ballpark for the SPX cash, which is what we're looking at right now. But if you think about these levels, you can see a world where, we get up to this 4,093 area. It seems like that's what we're going to, maybe kind of test, right? That would still be a lower high, right? If we zoom out, right? You would do something like, and this applies for pretty much all the indices, so I won't go into too much detail for all the other ones, but, imagine if you even got up to here, right? You could still see something like that, right? And then we just ratchet lower, right? And, the time frame here is not specific. It's not deliberate. But the point is, this is bullish in the very, very short term. But again, look how eerily similar this is to what is potentially developing here. And this was only week 16. So pretty, certainly not early in the weekly cycle. If you go back, you can see We had like this weekly cycle that ended on week 18. We had this one ended on week 19. So not unprecedented to have a weekly cycle. Week 17 in this case, that ends before week 20. But given especially the macro environment, it just seems like we're setting up for one of these kinds of things, right? Like let's see what happens next week. Maybe we make another slight higher high, and you got to watch for that whammy lower. So that's SPX, and the reality is all the other things look very similar. It's just the levels are obviously different because they're at different prices. But QQQ, same thing, except in the case of QQQ and actually IWM as well, they did not make a lower low on Friday, right? So that day 25 low for SPX was actually just an inside day for those two indices, right? Like it was actually green in this case. Well, I guess it was green for SPX as well, but it was a lower low. But either way, same kind of situation where really powerful day. And I would also note that we have another gap fill on the daily, like for the Qs coming up here at like 299. There's a gap fill on SPX as well. Definitely pull up a chart, take a look. It's pretty obvious. And in the case of QQQ, last week was actually week 13 and this week was week 14. This is a really powerful move. I'll zoom in. Like this is a really powerful swing low, but again, still really early in the weekly cycle. But there is also this idea of an alternative count, right? So if we hypothesize, right, that let's say this cycle to that, right. So let's say that this was a really long weekly cycle, right? This whole thing from here to here, right? That's a 36 weekly cycle, like incredibly long. This one here that preceded it was 31 weeks, which would be kind of strange to have a really long cycle preceded by an even longer cycle. But ultimately, that's kind of the way it works anyway. Cycles are nested within each other. So it'll be interesting. Again, in the case of QQQ, I think the level is pretty clear. We could see a rally all the way up to like 316, which is why I think short term, like you can definitely put a trade on here. Just be aware that, a lower low is still quite likely. And finally, IWM, same exact picture. In this case, maybe a rally up to 191. I had talked about this in the previous video. The idea of getting back to 200 might be crazy. And maybe this is what we're seeing, right? Maybe we get a furious rally up to like the 191 area. Maybe we even kiss 200. Maybe we even get back up to like the 208 area, right? Like I'll zoom in here, weekly chart, like right around up here, right? Maybe like even like 210, 211, and then we get our next leg lower. I don't know that. Wow, that would be quite the rally, but I guess we'll see. Either way, it seems like we're setting up at the very least. I mean, we've had some good upside. You'd expect maybe another 2, 3, maybe 4 days of upside. Doesn't mean they're all going to be green. Doesn't mean they're all going to be higher highs, but pattern, maybe we get, one more sort of thrust up for another week. And then, but again, price action in real time, that's the key. And finally, we'll look at the Dixie, the dollar index. That has huge implications for everything always. Daily chart, our high was day 12. We're now on day 19. We had this big down candle, and now we're just consolidating. Notice that, right? This was our high on day 12. And then day 13, we had massive downside follow through. But then we had a pretty big green day, but it was still inside this range. And everything else had still actually been inside the range of this day. That's really interesting. I mean, either way, this is coiling up for a big move, which is the same thing that gold and silver are doing, precious metals in general. I'll post a different video about that. But on the weekly chart, again, I talked about this. We have the possibility that this was, a top on week 2. At the same time, this is firmly an inside week, which makes sense, right? Because all those days clustered inside that other day, that's going to create your inside week, which is what we have here, basically a big nothing burger. So now it's a question, obviously we're closer to the downside for next week. So now it's a question of, do we make a low below 103.418, right? So we'll see.